The rain fell hard over the broken streets of the alien city. The sky was dark, filled with heavy clouds that never moved. Neon lights flickered weakly on the tall buildings, most of them half collapsed and empty. Fear hung in the air like smoke. No one dared to stop. No one dared to care. Daniel walked quickly through the streets, his head low, his jacket pulled tight against the cold wind. He was the only human here, living among aliens who barely trusted him, who barely trusted each other. He had seen enough sadness and death in this place to fill 10 lifetimes. He just wanted to find food, get back to his small shelter and survive another day. But then he heard it, a sound that made him stop mid-step, a small voice crying. He turned his head, scanning the empty street. Between the broken stalls and shattered walls, he spotted a small figure kneeling on the dirty ground. The figure clutched another body, a woman, who trembled violently, her limbs jerking in strange, painful spasms. The child's cries were high and broken. "Please, please help. Please fix my mom, she won't stop shaking." For a long second, Daniel just stood there frozen. Others passed by, heads down, pretending not to hear. This was a city of lost causes. Nobody helped anymore. But Daniel was human, and humans, even when beaten and broken, had a stubborn habit of caring. He rushed forward. The child looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. She was small, thin, her skin a soft shade of green with tiny glowing spots along her arms. Her clothes were torn. Her hands shook as she clutched her mother tighter. "Please," she sobbed again. Daniel knelt beside them. The woman, the child's mother, was in bad shape. Her body jerked uncontrollably. Her skin had turned a pale blue color and her eyes fluttered without focus. Sweat poured from her face. She was burning with fever, yet her body shivered like it was freezing. Daniel placed 2 fingers on her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but weak, fading. "We need to get her inside," Daniel said quickly. "She won't survive long out. Here." The child nodded desperately. Daniel picked the woman up carefully. She was light, far too light, like a bundle of dry sticks. He looked around. No one offered to help. Windows above slammed shut, doors locked. Fear ruled this place. Carrying her in his arms, Daniel ran toward the only place he could think of, an old abandoned clinic he had seen once while scavenging. The child followed closely, stumbling over her small feet, still sobbing quietly. The clinic's doors hung loosely from their hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old medicine. Broken beds and shattered monitors littered the floor. But it was shelter. Daniel laid the woman down on the least damaged bed he could find. He pulled a dusty blanket over her shaking body. The child hovered beside him, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Is she going to die?" the little girl asked, her voice breaking. Daniel looked at her, heart twisting. He had no real medical training, just old memories. Basic first aid learned long ago on Earth, survival tricks passed down through hard generations. But here in this dead city, no doctors would come, no help would arrive. It was just him, and a promise he hadn't even spoken yet. "I'll do everything I can," he said softly. He touched the woman's forehead. It was burning hot. He needed to cool her down, and fast. He ripped part of his own shirt, dipped it into a cracked sink where a trickle of water still flowed, and gently laid the wet cloth across her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Daniel worked quickly, finding old bandages, broken thermometers, anything that could help. He remembered his grandfather's words. "When you have nothing, use everything you've got." The child sat by her mother's side, holding her hand tightly, whispering in a strange language Daniel couldn't understand. Hours passed. Daniel stayed. He didn't move. He didn't sleep. Every few minutes he wet the cloth again. He massaged her hands and feet to keep the blood moving. He whispered small words of encouragement even if she couldn't hear him. "You're strong," he said. "You'll fight through this. Just hold on." The child fell asleep at her mother's side, too tired to cry anymore. Daniel watched over them both, feeling the weight of the whole broken city pressing down on his shoulders. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, hope flickered, small and weak, but alive. He had no idea what sickness had taken hold of the woman. He had no idea how much time they had left, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't leave them. Not tonight. Not ever. Somewhere deep inside him, that stubborn human fire, the one that refuses to give up, even when everything seems lost, burned a little brighter. In a city where everyone had turned away, one human stayed, and that made all the difference. The old clinic smelled of rust, dust, and forgotten hopes. Daniel knelt beside the trembling alien woman, feeling her life slipping through his fingers like dry sand. Her body jerked violently now, each spasm worse than the last. Sweat soaked the thin blanket Daniel had placed over her. The small alien, child, still half asleep, clung tightly to her mother's hand, whispering words only she could understand. Daniel wiped the woman's forehead again with the wet cloth, but it was like fighting a wildfire with a single drop of rain. He leaned in, checking her breathing. It was shallow, too shallow. He pressed 2 fingers against her wrist. The pulse was there, but faint and fading fast like a dying star. Panic threatened to rise inside him, but he pushed it down. Now was not the time for fear. Now was the time to fight. Daniel moved quickly, searching the broken cabinets and drawers of the abandoned clinic. Most were empty. Old syringes, shattered vials, useless rusted tools. Nothing that could help. But tucked inside a broken locker, he found something. A small bag of ancient Earth medical supplies. Basic antibiotics, alcohol wipes, old fever reducers, supplies left behind long ago by human relief teams. Maybe, just maybe, enough to make a difference. He tore open a fever reducer pack, crushing the tablet into powder. He mixed it with clean water from the clinic's backup system, barely a trickle, but enough, and carefully dripped the mixture into the woman's mouth. She coughed weakly, but swallowed. Daniel prayed it would be enough to buy her time. The night dragged on, heavy and slow. Daniel stayed awake, watching every tiny change in her breathing, every twitch of her fingers, every shudder of her chest. The child sat close, her small body shaking with fear. Her wide, glowing eyes never left her mother's face. "She's strong," Daniel whispered to her, even though he wasn't sure. "She's fighting, we just have to keep helping her." The child nodded, trusting him completely, because she had no one else left to trust. Daniel fought the heavy exhaustion pulling at him. He thought of Earth, of the old stories from his grandfather, stories about humans surviving the coldest winters, the fiercest storms, the deadliest wars. "Humans don't survive because we are the biggest," his grandfather had said. "We survive because we refuse to give up." Daniel refused to give up now, but as the hours passed, the woman's condition worsened. Her skin darkened to a sickly gray-green. Her fingers curled into claws. Her breathing slowed to ragged gasps. Daniel felt fear grip his heart tighter. This wasn't just fever. This wasn't just sickness, this was something else, something worse. Daniel leaned closer, studying her. Her veins were dark under her skin, almost black. Poison. It hit him like a punch. She wasn't just sick, she had been poisoned. Whether by accident or design, someone had unleashed something terrible in this district. Maybe the hunters, maybe worse. And now this woman, this innocent, was dying from it. Daniel gritted his teeth. He wouldn't let her go without a fight. He remembered old field tricks, ways to flush toxins without real machines. Basic, rough methods from survival manuals his ancestors had used during Earth's darkest times. He grabbed a clean cloth, soaked it in alcohol, and gently wiped her skin to try and draw out the heat. He massaged her limbs carefully to keep her blood moving. He made her sip water, tiny drops at a time, to fight the dehydration. It was brutal work, crude, desperate, but it was all he had, and he would not stop. The small child watched him with huge wet eyes. At one point, she reached out and placed her tiny hand over Daniel's wrist. "Thank you," she whispered in broken human words. Daniel felt something inside him crack and mend at the same time. He smiled tiredly at her. "She's strong," he said again. "And so are you." As the first light of dawn crept through the broken windows, Daniel sat back, exhausted beyond words. The woman still trembled, but her breathing had steadied slightly. Her skin, though still pale and sickly, had stopped darkening. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. It was hope, fragile, flickering, but alive. Daniel leaned against the wall, closing his burning eyes for just a second. He knew the battle was far from over. The real enemy on the poison was still inside her. But for now, she lived. And as long as she lived, Daniel would fight. Because that's what humans do. They fight, even when all the odds are against them. Especially then. The pale morning light touched the broken clinic walls, but inside, the fight was still going on. Daniel sat beside the trembling alien woman, his back aching, his hands raw. The little girl slept fitfully against her mother's side, her tiny hand clutching her mother's wrist like an anchor. Daniel hadn't closed his eyes all night, and he wasn't planning to now. He could see it. The sickness was still inside her. Her skin twitched, her muscles stiffened. The fever burned hotter under the thin blanket, and Daniel knew the poison hadn't given up, neither would he. He dug into his memory, pulling out the old lessons. Lessons from a world long forgotten by most aliens. Lessons humans had learned, the hard way. On Earth, the original death world. There, when people had no hospitals, no machines, no miracles, they survived with their hands, their knowledge, and their will. Daniel remembered how his grandfather had once treated a hunter's venom with nothing but herbs, heat, and pressure. He remembered how fever had been fought not by magic, but by sweat, water, and endless care. Old skills. Ancient human skills. He would use them now. Daniel worked quickly. First, he gathered what he could from the ruined clinic. A few cracked glass bottles, scraps of old cloth, rusted metal trays from his own satchel. He pulled a small survival kit, something he had carried for years without thinking. Inside were simple things: a fire starter, a knife, a few strips of dried herbs used long ago for basic medicines. Not much, but enough. He built a crude water boiler using a broken tray and a flickering heating rod he found under a pile of debris. Boiling water, clean, hot, and ready. He dipped the cloth into the boiling water, cooled it slightly, and wrapped it around the woman's arms and legs, forcing her muscles to relax, forcing the poison to move through her system faster. It was dangerous. It was desperate, but it was a chance. Next, he mixed the dried herbs into a small paste. They weren't meant for alien biology. He had no way of knowing if they would help or hurt, but doing nothing would kill her anyway. Carefully, he dabbed the herbal paste onto the woman's temples, her wrists, and her heart. The clinic filled with a sharp, earthy smell, the smell of old earth forests, wild and untamed. Daniel whispered quietly as he worked. Old words from ancient earth healing songs his grandfather had taught him. Not because he believed in magic, but because hope was a medicine too. "Stay with me," he murmured. "You're stronger than this." Hours passed. The woman's spasms slowed. Her breathing, once shallow gasps, became deeper, though still weak. Daniel didn't stop. He massaged her hands and feet, forcing blood to move. He wiped sweat from her brow again and again. He fed her, tiny sips of water mixed with the faint remains of the fever medicine. Every time he felt himself weaken, every time his body screamed for rest, he looked at the little girl, at her tiny sleeping form, at her trembling trust, and he kept going. Once he thought he lost her. Her body stiffened, her mouth opened in a silent scream, her eyes rolled back. "No!" Daniel shouted, grabbing her shoulders. He began chest compressions, rough, desperate, pushes to force her heart to keep beating. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. He counted loudly, refusing to stop. The little girl woke, blinking in terror. "Fix her," she cried. "Please." Daniel didn't stop. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Finally, a weak, coughing gasp. The woman's chest rose and fell again. She wasn't gone. Not yet. Daniel let out a shaky breath and wiped his sweaty forehead with a trembling hand. He caught the little girl's gaze. "I told you," he whispered, voice rough but firm. "She's strong." Later, as the shadows stretched long and thin across the cracked floor, Daniel felt something shift. The woman's fever broke. Her skin, once burning, was now damp and cool. Her muscles relaxed, her breathing evened. Slowly, painfully, but surely. She was winning. Daniel leaned back against the wall, utterly exhausted but smiling. He had used no machines, no magic cures, no alien tech, only the oldest weapons humanity had ever known: skill, will, and a heart that refused to surrender. The little girl crawled over to him, tears shining in her wide eyes. "Thank you," she whispered again. Daniel ruffled her hair gently. "We're not done yet," he said, voice soft but strong. "But she's fighting, just like you." The girl nodded fiercely, her tiny fists clenched in determination. Together they sat beside the sleeping woman guarding her in the dim clinic, a human, an alien child, bound by something stronger than blood. Hope. And somewhere deep inside him, Daniel realized something important. In a universe full of fear and darkness, sometimes the smallest, oldest skills were the ones that saved the world. And humans, stubborn, reckless, unbreakable, had never forgotten how to fight for life. The sun had risen high above the broken city, but inside the ruined clinic, time had stopped. Daniel sat beside the alien woman, feeling the weight of every heartbeat, or the terrifying moments when there was none. Her fever had broken hours ago, but the poison inside her had left scars, deep ones. Her body was still weak, too weak. The little girl sat close, holding her mother's hand tightly, her tiny body shaking with fear and exhaustion. Daniel watched them both, feeling helpless for the first time since the fight had begun. He had done everything he could. Every trick, every ancient human skill. Now it was up to her. Now it was a battle inside her body, one he could no longer fight for her. Suddenly, the woman's chest stopped moving. Daniel blinked once, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light, but no rise, no fall. Panic hit him like a hammer. "No," he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. The little girl cried out, clutching her mother's limp arm. "Mom, please, wake up." Daniel moved fast, pure instinct taking over. He tilted the woman's head back, checked her airway. Nothing. He pressed his hands against her chest and began chest compressions. Fast, steady, desperate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted under his breath, refusing to think about what it meant if he failed. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He leaned down, gave her 2 rescue breaths, the old human way. Her chest rose faintly under his breath, but it wasn't enough. Again, harder. 11, 12, 13. The little girl sobbed. Louder, her small fists pounding against the broken floor. "Please fix her, please." Daniel's muscles screamed in pain. His arms shook, his vision blurred. But he didn't stop. "Come on," he shouted at her lifeless form. "Fight. Don't give up." In that moment, it wasn't just about saving her. It was about defying the whole cruel galaxy that had turned its back on them. It was about proving that life, even broken, even poisoned, was worth fighting for. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the smartest, but they were the ones who never stopped fighting, especially when it mattered most. Daniel kept pressing, kept breathing for her, kept refusing to surrender. Then, A twitch. He almost didn't believe it. Her fingers jerked weakly. Her chest gave a small shuddering rise. Daniel paused, panting. The little girl gasped, her glowing eyes wide with hope. Another twitch. Another breath. Slow. Shaky. But real. Daniel sank back onto his heels, tears he didn't even realize he was holding blurring his vision. She was alive, still fragile, still half in the shadow world between life and death, but alive. The little girl scrambled forward, hugging her mother tightly, careful not to hurt her. Mom. Mom. You're here. Daniel sat against the wall, chest heaving, feeling the weight of the fight settle into his bones. He had pulled her back, for now, but he knew the battle wasn't over. Now came the hardest part, rebuilding her strength, keeping her body alive long enough for real healing to begin. He closed his eyes briefly, gathering the last scraps of his energy. He would stay. He would not leave her side, not until she could walk, not until the child could laugh again without fear. Hours passed. Slowly, the woman's breathing became steadier. Her muscles stopped jerking. Her color, once deathly gray, warmed by a few shades. Celine, that was the name the little girl whispered. Celine clung to her mother's hand as if she could anchor her soul to this world through sheer will. Daniel watched them, something heavy and warm swelling inside his chest. He had seen death before. He had fought it before. But this was different. This was life clawing its way back through poison, through fear, through darkness. And he had been part of it. As evening fell, Daniel patched up what he could around the clinic, fixing a broken light panel, scavenging a few edible rations from the old cabinets. Every movement was slow, careful. He kept glancing back at the bed, checking. Breath in, breath out. Every small sound was a victory. Later that night, as he sat near the small fire he had built, Jason looked up at the cracked ceiling, where faint stars peeked through. He thought about Earth, about the old stories of healers who saved villages with nothing but their hands and heart. He thought about how easy it would have been to walk away when he first heard the child's cry. But he hadn't. And now, because of that, a life had been saved, maybe two. In a world that had forgotten kindness, in a city that had abandoned hope, one human, armed with nothing but stubbornness, old knowledge, and a heart that refused to quit, had made a difference. And tomorrow, he would do it again. Because that's what humans do. They fight for every breath, even when no one else will. The next morning, the clinic was quieter than it had been in days. The woman, still weak but alive, slept deeply under a patchwork of old blankets. Beside her, the little girl had finally drifted into peaceful sleep, curled like a kitten by her mother's side. Daniel sat by the broken window, his arms crossed, his eyes sharp and watchful. He should have felt relief. But instead, a strange unease pulled at him, a whisper at the back of his mind. Something wasn't right. He stood up quietly and walked to the far side of the ruined building where old supply crates and rusted cabinets stood in a dusty heap. In the chaos of the last few days, he hadn't had time to look closely. Now he searched carefully, his hands brushing past cracked vials, burned equipment, melted data pads. Then he found it, a small metal container, half buried under rubble. It was marked with a strange symbol, one Daniel didn't recognize. But the moment he touched it, his skin prickled. He forced the lock open with a rusted knife. Inside were broken glass tubes, blackened syringes, and scraps of paperwork written in two languages. One alien, one human. Daniel's stomach twisted. Deep key. Words were simple but chilling. Field experiment 12B, target lower sectors, monitor death rate, no intervention. His hands shook slightly as he set the papers down. This wasn't a natural sickness, it was a weapon. Someone had released a poison into the lower sectors, into the poorest areas where no one would notice, where no one would care. And the woman, lying on the bed, the little girl, They had just been numbers on someone's cold, heartless report. Daniel's jaw tightened in rage. They had been marked for death. He thought of the other sick people he had seen while scavenging, the way bodies had piled up near the old markets, the silent fear in the eyes of the survivors. He had thought it was some new disease, something random. But it wasn't random. It was planned. Someone wanted the aliens in this district gone. Wiped, out quietly, forgotten by the world above. Daniel paced the broken clinic, mind racing. Who would do this? The local authorities, the gangs? Some hidden enemy trying to reshape the city from the shadows? He didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure. If they found out a human was helping the survivors, they would come for him too, and they wouldn't stop with just him. They would finish what they started, and wipe out everyone too weak to fight back, including the woman he had just saved, including her little girl. He couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not ever. Daniel moved quickly. He found what remained of the clinic's storage: old medical kits, half-charged power cells, rusty defensive drones. Most of it was junk, but some pieces still worked. He gathered what he could into a bag: bandages, basic meds, a portable solar heater, 2 water purifiers. Every item could mean the difference between life and death. He also found an old handheld scanner. It flickered to life in his hands, showing faint energy traces along the walls, and a warning: contaminated zone detected. The poison wasn't gone, it was still here, hanging in the air, seeping into everything. And it was spreading. Slowly. Silently. Daniel returned to the woman and the child. The woman stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open for the first time. Her gaze was cloudy, full of confusion and fear. Daniel knelt beside her and smiled gently. "You're safe," he said softly. "For now." The little girl woke too, rubbing her eyes. When she saw her mother awake, she gave a tiny, broken cry of happiness and threw her arms around her. Daniel stood up and looked around the ruined clinic. Safe wasn't good enough anymore. They needed to leave. Now, before the unseen enemy returned to finish what they started. Outside, the city lay in ruins under the burning sun. Hunters prowled the streets. Drones hovered silently. Whispers of new deaths drifted like smoke through the alleys. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. And in that war, one tired human and 2 fragile survivors would have to stand against a system built to crush them. But Daniel didn't care how big the enemy was. He had made a promise the first moment he heard the child's cry in the dark, to fight, to protect, to never walk away, no matter the cost. The city streets were deathly silent. Dust swirled in the air like ghostly hands reaching for the living. Daniel pulled the old clinic door shut behind him, his heart heavy, his mind racing. Inside, the alien, woman and her daughter rested, safe for now. But outside, danger waited in every shadow. The poison wasn't an accident. It was a weapon. And whoever had unleashed it wouldn't stop until every voice in the lower sectors was silenced. Daniel looked down at his hands, rough, dirty, and scarred, and felt the old fire rise inside him. He couldn't fight an army. He couldn't stop the poison alone. But he could do something no weapon could ever destroy. He could give people hope. And hope, he knew, was more dangerous than any bullet. Daniel moved fast through the crumbling streets. He went to the places others feared: the underground food markets, the hidden water wells, the old storage tunnels where the forgotten huddled. He spoke to the people no one else would even look at: the sick, the scavengers, the broken. At first, they stared at him with blank eyes. Fear had lived in them too long, but Daniel didn't bring promises he couldn't keep. He didn't bring speeches. He brought medicine. He brought clean water. He brought the truth. He told them about the poison. He showed them how to make small, simple traps to stop the spread, how to clean water with fire and cloth, how to treat the early symptoms before it was too late. He shared what little he had, and taught them to share it too. Word spread quickly. The human who healed. The human who stayed when even their own kind ran. The human who fought even when there was no reason left to fight. Some called him foolish. Others called him dangerous. But slowly, quietly, broken people began to stand a little taller. They began to whisper less about fear and more about fighting back. One evening, in the ruins of an old plaza, Daniel gathered a small crowd. Aliens, of all shapes and colors, stood together, tired, sick, but listening. Daniel stood on a broken fountain looking out over them. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a leader. He was just a man too stubborn to give up. "You are not alone," he said, his voice loud and clear. "They want you to think you're weak, that you don't matter." He pointed toward the ruined towers where the rich and powerful lived. "But they are afraid. Afraid of what happens if you stop hiding, if you start fighting." The crowd shifted uneasily, hope flickering in their tired faces. Daniel raised his voice. "You have survived worse. You survived when the skies burned. You survived when the ground shook. You are still here." He pointed to himself. "I'm just one man, one human, and I chose to fight for you." He spread his arms wide. "Now you must fight for each other." Silence hung heavy in the plaza. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. A cracked voice from the crowd called out, "We are not dead yet." Another voice. "We still have strength." A third, louder. "We will not hide anymore." The broken plaza shook with the sound of their voices, not with anger, not with fear, but with something far stronger, hope, real hope. That night, Daniel walked back to the clinic through the empty streets, a small smile tugging at his mouth. He was still just one man, but he had lit a fire in a place everyone else thought was cold and dead. And sometimes, one fire was all it took to burn down a wall of fear. Inside the clinic, the woman was awake, weak, yes, but her eyes were clear now. She watched Daniel approach, her gaze full of something deep and unspoken. Gratitude, trust, and a fierce, silent promise. Beside her, the little girl smiled shyly. Daniel knelt down, ruffling the girl's hair. "You're safe," he whispered. For now, but deep inside he knew the real battle was still ahead. The enemy wouldn't stop. The poison makers would come looking. But this time when they came, they wouldn't find a scattered, frightened group of victims. They would find survivors. They would find fighters. They would find people who had been taught by a stubborn human who refused to bow to fear. And when fear came knocking again, they would answer with fire. The first true sunrise in weeks broke over the shattered city. Golden light slipped through the cracks of broken towers, shining on ruins that had known only darkness for too long. It touched broken windows, rusted doors, and the tired faces of those who had survived the worst, and it touched Daniel, standing alone in the middle of the ruined street facing the coming storm. He could hear the low hum of engines in the distance. They were coming. The poison makers. The ones who had unleashed sickness to wipe out a people too poor and too weak to matter. But they had made one mistake. They had forgotten that life, even when crushed, had a stubborn way of fighting back, especially when taught by a human who refused to kneel. Behind Daniel, the people he had saved began to gather, not just the alien woman and her child, but others too. Dozens of survivors, thin and bruised, but standing tall. Some carried old tools turned into weapons. Others brought broken shields made from scrap metal. All of them brought the fire Daniel had lit inside them. They didn't look like an army, but they didn't look afraid either. Daniel stood at the front, calm and ready. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who made a promise, in the dark, a promise to stand when no one else would, and he would keep it, no matter the cost. The enemy's vehicles appeared, kicking up dust. Men in black armor stepped out, faces hidden behind helmets, weapons ready. They moved confidently, at first expecting fear, expecting surrender. But as they stepped closer, they saw something they didn't expect. Not fear, not panic, but a wall of people, standing side by side, facing them without flinching. And at the center, a human with fire in his eyes. The leader of the attackers barked an order. Surrender, lay down, submit. Daniel stepped forward, raising his voice so all could hear. "We will not kneel," he said. His voice was not loud, but it was steady, stronger than any shout. The people behind him repeated the words louder. "We will not kneel." Again, stronger. "We will not kneel." The attackers hesitated. This wasn't what they had prepared for. This wasn't supposed to happen. One human, one broken city. And yet, they were losing before a single shot was fired. Because they couldn't kill what they couldn't break, and Daniel had made them unbreakable. The leader of the attackers signaled retreat. For now, the vehicles turned back. Engines roaring, dust swallowed them again. Victory, not by weapons, but by spirit. When the enemy was gone, the people cheered. Not loud, wild cheers, but proud, deep ones. The cheers of survivors who had found their voice again. Daniel smiled, tiredly, feeling the weight of the long fight settle into his bones. He turned back toward the woman and the child. The woman, still pale, stood leaning on a piece of metal for support. The little girl grinned up at him, her glowing eyes full of life. Daniel knelt to meet her gaze. "You're safe now," he said. She shook her head and pointed at him with a small smile. "No," she said softly. "We're safe. Because of you." Daniel blinked back the sting in his eyes. Not from pride, not from victory, but from something far stronger. Connection, family, hope. As the sun rose higher over the broken city, Daniel realized something he hadn't understood before. Sometimes, the greatest, heroes were not the ones with the sharpest blades or the strongest armies. Sometimes they were just the ones who stayed, who fought when everyone else gave up, who chose kindness when the world chose cruelty. A single human armed with nothing but stubbornness, heart, and an old world's forgotten wisdom had become the lifeline they never expected. And in doing so, he had changed their future forever. Above them, the sky turned from gray to gold. The city was still broken. The battles were not over. But now, among the ruins, something new had been born. Hope. The kind that no weapon could destroy. The kind that grew stronger every time someone stood up and refused to be silent. And Daniel, tired, battered, but unbowed, would keep standing. For them. For all of them. For the future they deserved.